Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to crack open a 2,000-year-old legal case file from the Talmud. It's a kind of detective story, really. It starts with a pretty bizarre accident, but ends up asking a question that feels surprisingly modern and honestly pretty personal. I mean, really think about it. Could something happen to you completely without your permission or your intention and fundamentally change your status in the world? It's pretty wild, but it turns out that ancient rabbinic sages were wrestling with this exact idea. And their debate is just a masterclass in logic, evidence, and what it even means to be human. Okay, let's dive into this. So here's the setup. You have a woman who is in a state of ritual impurity, and she's compelled, maybe she's pushed, maybe she just falls. The point is, it's against her will, and she ends up in a ritual bath, a mikveh. The big question, right then and there, is, does that count? Is she now considered ritually pure?
Right off the bat, our two lead detectives in this case have totally different theories. On one side, you've got a sage named Rav, and he comes up with this kind of split decision. He says, yeah, okay, she's pure enough to be with her husband. That's an everyday, non-sacred thing. But, he says, she is not pure enough to eat sacred food, something called terumah. Then you have Rabbi Yoḥanan, who's just like, nope, no intent, no purity, period, end of story. And that's the central conflict we're going to get to the bottom of.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this thing. We'll start with the first logical challenge, then check out a piece of evidence involving a wave, search for a real legal precedent, take this fascinating little detour into the laws of animal slaughter, and finally, put all the pieces together to really understand the difference between intention and action. All right, first up, let's see how the argument gets going, because there's an immediate problem with Rav's ruling. So a new player enters the game, a really sharp sage named Rava, and he immediately spots what he thinks is a huge hole in Rav's logic. He basically says, wait a second, you're telling me this accidental plunge solved the most serious problem she had, being with her husband? That's a huge deal, right? We're talking about a serious spiritual consequence called karet, but you're saying it doesn't work for the less serious issue of eating some sacred food? That makes no sense. It's completely backwards.
But Rav's defender, a guy named Rav Naḥman, he comes back with a really clever argument. And it all comes down to this one word, Chullin. It just means non-sacred, ordinary, mundane stuff. His point is, a husband, that's part of the everyday world. It's Chullin. And maybe, just maybe, for the ordinary world, you don't actually need intention to become pure. The sacred world, though, that's a whole different ballgame. It's a great theory, but you gotta back it up, right? He needs some proof.
And so, the hunt for evidence begins. And the first clue they find has to do with, well, the ocean.
This looks like a total slam dunk for Rav's side. They pull out a Mishnah, a super important legal text from around 200 CE, and it says that a random wave that breaks off from the sea and crashes over a person or some dishes makes them pure. I mean, that's the literal definition of an accident. There's no intent there at all. This looks like a smoking gun, right? Exhibit A, you don't need intent.
But not so fast. You know, the Talmud is all about questioning everything. So someone immediately throws out a counterargument. Hold on. What if this Mishnah is talking about a very specific situation? What if it means a person who's just sitting there on the shore waiting for a wave to come and wash over them? If that's the case, then there is intent, and this piece of evidence tells us absolutely nothing. And just like that, the evidence is shaky. Okay, so clue number one didn't quite pan out. The search continues for a case that is, without a doubt, purely accidental.
And wouldn't you know it, they find one. Picture this. A guy has impure hands, and he reaches into a stream. Now he's not trying to purify them. He's just trying to grab some vegetables that fell in. The ruling, his hands become pure from the water, even though that wasn't his goal at all. So this feels like another really strong point for Rav's side. For an everyday purpose, like just using your hands, intention doesn't seem to be required.
But Rava? Oh, he is not letting this go. He comes right back with another quote from the Mishnah, and this one seems to say the exact opposite. If one immersed without intent, it is as though he did not immerse. This feels like a total contradiction. It sounds like it's saying very clearly that you always need intent. So Rav Naḥman tries to do a little damage control, explain it away, say it only applies to sacred things. But Rav is not having it. He feels like he's getting the runaround. So what does he do? He does what any great detective would do. He hits the archives himself to find something that'll settle this once and for all. And boom, this is the breakthrough moment. Rava uncovers this external teaching, a baraita, from the same time period as the Mishnah, and it spells it out perfectly. Someone who immerses without intent is allowed to eat non-sacred food, but is not allowed to eat sacred food. I mean, it's a perfect match. It lines up exactly with what Rav said at the very beginning. Case closed. Rav was right. There really is a difference between the sacred and the non-sacred. Okay, so they've got their answer. But to really lock it in, the rabbis do this classic Talmudic thing. They take the principle they just proved and they test it somewhere completely different to see if it holds up. In this case, animal slaughter. And what they find is pretty amazing. Turns out there's a nearly identical debate happening over in the world of slaughter. You've got Rabbi Natan, who argues that for a regular, non-sacred animal, you don't need the specific intention to slaughter it properly. But for a sacred animal, a sacrifice, you absolutely do. His opponents disagree about the regular animal, but check this out. Everyone agrees on the sacred one. It just goes to show that same core idea is at play here too. That line between sacred and non-sacred really matters when it comes to intent. Okay, so let's bring this all the way back. How does this solve the original puzzle about the woman who fell in the water? So we've got the principle down, but the Talmud, it's never satisfied. It wants one last detail. Like, what do we really mean by an accident here? Because as it turns out, there are different kinds of accidents. And this is where the detail gets really, really cool. The Talmud actually breaks it down into two different scenarios. Scenario 1, a total fluke. She slips and falls off a bridge into the water. Now, for the folks who say you need zero intent for everyday stuff, that works. She's pure. But then there's scenario 2. She goes into the water on purpose, but just to cool off, right? She's not thinking about the ritual at all. In this case, she intended the action, getting wet, but not the ritual outcome. And that subtle difference is the kind of accident that purifies her for her regular, non-sacred life. And that brings us right back to that big question from the beginning. You see, this whole thing, this incredibly detailed legal detective story, it was never just about the rules. It was about something so much bigger. How much does our inner state, our intention, define our outer world? And the answer the Talmud gives is, well, it depends. Are we talking about the sacred parts of our lives or the everyday ones? And that's a question that's definitely worth thinking about long after this case is closed.